It's really cool to be here. I love New Zealand. It's absolutely gorgeous, so thank you for hosting me. I want to talk to you a little bit about what has sort of become my life's work. Hal mentioned I went to Silicon Valley in the early 80s, and since then I've been passionate, very passionate about helping technology companies bring their innovations to market and sell more stuff. So with that, that's really what I'm here to hopefully help you guys with a little bit of insight from Silicon Valley. Hal mentioned a book that I have coming out shortly. It's called Get to Aha, and it really is this, the framework that I've developed over the course of my career to help companies with their positioning. To me, it's all about selling stuff, right? We all want to sell stuff and grow. That's what this conference is about. And selling stuff starts with good marketing, and good marketing starts with great positioning. So that's what the book is about, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So those of you who have ever sort of had to play around with the idea of creating a brand or building a brand, you know that it's a complicated thing. And in my world, my framework for this, companies have two sides to them, just like people. I like to treat companies like people because, after all, we are selling things to people, whether they're in a business or whether they're a consumer. So I look at a company's identity as having two pieces, a rational side, which I call the yin, and an emotional side, which is the yang. So between the yin and the yang, you get an entire company's identity. The one thing that I would like to put forth is that doing the rational part of this first is really critical, because once you understand what you stand for in the marketplace, what your role is in the market, and what your relevance is, then you actually have something to work with to create the more emotional side, or what I call the branding side, the brand side of your identity, and you can now reflect that hardcore foundation of who you are with the emotional attraction. And because we're all selling stuff to people, whether they're in businesses or whether they are consumers, we want to appeal to their rational side as well as their emotional side. It's very important. So the two toughest questions in business, and I invite you all to think about these questions as you sit here, is who are you and why do you matter? And once you can answer those two questions, you are well on your way to figuring out how to sell more stuff. And that's really the goal that we are all shooting for. I have a framework that consists of what I call the 6 C's of positioning to get us all started on the process of how you actually answer those questions. Who are you and why do you matter? It starts with something I call core. It's about your core DNA, which is the actual genome, if you will, that lives inside your company and informs who you are at your core, so that any marketing that you do coming off of that actually has authenticity. It's interesting, in today's world, since the internet came upon us, it is a lot harder to create a false image for a company than it used to be. It used to be you could create any image you wanted if you had a big enough advertising budget. Today, that doesn't matter as much. What matters is who you are, and can you express that authentically with your marketing materials. So the first thing to worry about is, what is your DNA? Now, the framework that I've come up with here is all around the notion that there are really only 3 types of companies in the world. I know that may seem strange, but I've been doing this for over 35 years, and I've really come to the conclusion that there are really only 3 types. There are companies that are really focused on customers. I call those mothers. There are companies that are really focused on products. I call them mechanics. And there are companies that are really focused on concepts, and I call those missionaries. Mothers basically build their entire company around an attention to detail with their customers. Examples of some of these companies like Amazon, McKinsey is a great example of that, Amex. You may or may not be familiar with Nordstrom, which is a retail store in the United States that focuses on customers. IKEA is another one, Facebook is another one. These are companies that really care about their customers in a way that it goes above and beyond what other companies do. Zappos is another great example of a customer-oriented company. In fact, the CEO of Zappos wrote a book called Delivering Happiness, Tony Hsieh. All he ever talks about is how to create customer delight and customer satisfaction. In fact, Zappos holds the record for the longest customer care call that has ever been recorded, and I believe it was something like 13 hours or something like that. So if you can imagine spending that much time on the phone with a customer problem, you might be a mother-oriented company. The product-oriented companies, on the other hand, I've nicknamed them mechanics, and these are companies that win based on building the best product or the best service ever. And these companies are companies like Microsoft. Oracle is a great example of a company like that. GE, General Electric, Sony, Hewlett-Packard, even Adobe and Electronic Arts are companies in the tech sector that focus specifically on product. And these companies structure themselves differently than mother-oriented companies. They hire people differently. They compensate people differently. They talk about different things in meetings. They've really defined a way of life that is all about the product, whereas mother companies are all about the customer. And the third type of company, of which we have several in Silicon Valley, are what I call missionary companies. And these are companies that exist to change behavior on a fundamental level in the marketplace. These are companies that win based on really changing an industry, really coming to a whole new way of doing things and new behavior. Federal Express is a great example of a company that did this. Virgin is a good example of a company. Salesforce, Google, Apple, there are a lot of companies that started off their life in the missionary role. So with the understanding of what those three types of companies are, the next thing to understand if you're going to position yourself for success in the market is to understand which directions you can go from a positioning perspective once you understand what your DNA is. So each one of those types that I mentioned, mothers, mechanics, and missionaries, each one has a choice of two directions to go for positioning. If you happen to be a mother and you're customer focused, what you can do is you can either go to market with a segmentation strategy or you can go to market with a customer experience strategy. They're very different, but it actually matters which one you choose. If you choose customer segmentation, you're a company like Forever 21, which is a retail store in the United States targeted to young women. Or there's a tool company called Snap-on Tools, which is a mother-oriented company that focuses on the customer segmentation of working with professional mechanics and professional tool users. If you are an experience-oriented mother, you're a company like Disney, where you exist to create the most amazing experience you possibly can for your customers. And Disney, while they don't have the best food or the best rides or even the best movies, they focus on the experience that their customers have when they come to a Disney theme park or watch a Disney movie. So once you understand that you're a mother and you choose which direction you can go, you're halfway towards positioning yourself for success. So that's a great thing to be. It takes a lot of the work out of the equation. It's not just guessing. If you happen to be a product-oriented company, or what I call a mechanic, you can position yourself again in one of two ways. You can be a features-oriented mechanic, or you can be a value-oriented mechanic. Feature-oriented mechanics are companies that build a platform or they build a product, and then every time they do something new, it's another feature on top of that platform. And when you read their announcements in the press or you go to their website, it's all about the next great feature that has been added onto their platform. Microsoft is a great example of a very successful company as what I call a features mechanic, and so is Oracle. Or you can position yourself around value, which is not always more for less, but can be more for less. So a company like Walmart, for example, which is a retail store in the United States, positions itself around the idea of more for less. And that's all their marketing is associated with that idea. But other companies can position themselves around value, even if they're not a company that's trying to sell something for a low price. For example, we have a phenomenon in the United States around something we call air taxi, which is the business of taking small airplanes and flying them from small airport to small airport in what we call a point-to-point transportation system. So there's a company near where I live in San Carlos called Surfair. Surfair has bought a number of Pilatus aircraft, which are turboprops, and they fly these airplanes to and from about 6 different airports: Las Vegas, the Bay Area, and Los Angeles. But they go to the small airports. And so what they offer is they offer the benefits of private air travel without the price of private air travel. It's more expensive than an airline ticket, but you end up at a destination closer to where you have to be, and you get to sit on a private airplane, even though it's not a jet, and you get to be treated like you're on a private airplane, and you do not have to go through security or any of those other things. So they offer a value that is better than what you would get flying a private jet, and it's also better than what you would get flying an airline. So that company happens to be what I call a value-based mechanic. The third type, the Missionary, these are really very interesting companies. They work on positioning themselves in one of two ways, and sometimes these two ways come together and form one way. There's the next big thing missionaries, and then there are what I call cult of personality missionaries. So Apple was a cult of personality missionary, for sure. Steve Jobs, who I had the great pleasure to work with over a number of years, actually created a cult of personality around himself and his product and led that company to do the next big thing time and time and time again. And when Steve passed away a number of years ago, he handed over his company to, I think, one of the world's best stewards of the assets he was given. But unfortunately, Tim Cook is not a missionary, and he has not been able to deliver a next big thing since Steve died. But that's okay, because the value of that company has just gone up, and he's doing an incredible job becoming what I call now a features-based mechanic. So that's what that company's all about. Next big thing companies are trying to change the world. I work with one right now in the biotech area. This is a company called Retrotope. And Retrotope, like every other company that is founded by a baby boomer, is trying to reverse aging. So this company has the goal of reversing aging. They have a compound that they feel prevents the damage of cells in your body. And so they are deciding that they are positioning themselves as the next big thing missionary to change the world of how we deal with aging. They're starting with attacking a specific disease called Friedreich's ataxia. They feel that they can cure that disease, and once they do cure that disease, then they will be able to take that compound and position it more like aspirin, where it will be available for everybody to use to slow down the damage in cells in a regular body. So they're doing something that is incredibly difficult. Next big thing companies usually die because it's very difficult to do the next big thing. If you're really going to be the next big thing, you're usually the third or the fourth or the fifth company to do that particular thing in the market, because you've learned from the pioneers who have gone out there first and failed, and then you get a shot at trying to fix the mistakes that they made. But at any rate, there are these three kinds of companies: mothers, mechanics, missionaries. Each one of them have two directions to go in positioning. And once you decide that, once you've got that done, you've got the hardcore part about figuring out what your DNA is, so you can go to the next step, which is to figure out what category are you in. This sounds like a very easy question to answer, but it's actually quite challenging, because you have a big choice here. Are you going to be a new category, or are you going to be an existing category? So building a new category is tough, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of energy. And that's a hard thing to do, and as I said before, if you're building a new category, you may die very soon into building it. So be very careful, tread lightly if you decide you want to be a new category. Everyone thinks it's very exciting to build a new category, but there is no such thing as a category of one. So the minute you build a new category, you're going to have a lot of competitors coming in after you. The other idea is to go for an existing category and then do something like redefine that category or refine it in some way or create a subcategory. I like to think of Chrysler as a great example, who actually created a subcategory within the automotive sector. They were having some very difficult times, and out of desperation, they invented a new kind of car called the minivan. They took the chassis that they already had and they put a different top on it, and they put a sliding door on it, and they called it the minivan, and an entire new industry was born. They were very fortunate to have had that discovery when they did, because it turned around the company's fortunes. So category is a tough decision, but it's one you have to make, and then you have to kind of stick with it. The third C you have to worry about is your community. What is the ecosystem into which you are launching your innovation? It's one thing to think about your potential customers, and we all have to think about that. But the thing a lot of people don't think about are what is the influencer circle around those customers. And there's a ton of those. And every industry and every product has a different ecosystem into which they have to launch their innovation. So we like to think about this as an entire community. This is some of the circles you have to deal with, but it really pays off to think very long and hard about who influences the people who are making the purchase decisions of whatever it is that you are buying. So you sit at the center of this, and certainly your customers are part of that. The potential customers are part of that circle. The people who influence those, the people who influence the buying cycle, and then also the press and the analyst community is another influencer set. So when you're coming up with positioning for a potential target customer, remember that you're not only positioning for that target customer, but you're positioning for the entire community that influences that potential customer. The fourth C is competition. I think we all know that we have to worry about competition when we're launching something into the marketplace. And the key here is, how do you differentiate your offering from everybody else's offering? And that sounds easy, but it's very, very challenging to do. What you're really trying to do is to figure out what is your differentiated role and relevance vis-a-vis your competitors, and in whatever landscape it is that you are in. So what is the one thing you do better than everyone else? What is your onlyness statement? So Simon Sinek, who you may have read about, has this framework he calls the onlyness statement. And it is what is the only thing that your company does that no one else does that you do better than everyone else? I call that your superpower. But you need to understand what your superpower is before you begin to answer the question, what is your role and relevance in the marketplace? There's another framework out there that Steve Blank came up with, who is one of the founders of the Lean Startup movement. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that, and Steve is a friend of mine and a former client. He came up with this diagram he calls the petal diagram. And the petal diagram not only shows you what an obvious competitor might look like, but it also shows you where a tangential competitor might come and sneak in on you from behind. So it gives you the opportunity to map on all these petals who might the obvious competitors be and who might tangential competitors be. So when you're done filling this out and you've dotted this petal diagram with all the potential competitors, you can hopefully see a white space in there, a space where there are no dots. And that space where there are no dots is where you belong. That's your unique spot that you can own that no one else can own. And that's what you begin to try to articulate. What is that white space in the market that you and only you can own because of your differentiation? The fifth C in this framework is what I call context. And this is the understanding of what is going on in the world around you so that you don't position something too late to the market or too early to the market. As was said earlier, there's a bunch of things happening, and they've been covered in this conference, things like cloud computing, things like artificial intelligence, things like social. These are all things that are happening in our environment today, and you need to take them into consideration as you think about positioning your product. You don't want to position something, for example, around mobile. Even though everybody knows what mobile is, and even though everybody uses a mobile device every day, the wave of mobile is gone now because everything is mobile. We've already achieved that. So you don't want to position some solution today as a mobile solution. You want it more to be around cloud or around machine learning or some other more relevant thing that is happening today. So it's important to know, what are you launching into so that you can launch it correctly and it will resonate with people's minds. And finally, the last C in this criteria, in this framework, is what I call criteria, which is really your list, your checklist of what should that positioning statement contain so that you feel that you've hit the nail on the head at the end of the day. So this is something you have complete control over. If you're launching a new product into the millennial sector, you might want to make sure that that product has some philanthropic element to it. You want to make sure that the positioning statement has something to do with a balanced life. You might want to make sure that that has some sort of hipness factor to it or a coolness thing about it. So you write those things down, you know, must include philanthropy, must be hip, must be young, whatever it is that you want the criteria to be. At the end of the day, when you write your positioning statement, you'll go back to that criteria list and you will be able to say, yep, I got 3 of the 5, I'm good. If you got none of the 5, then you have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. So what I like to do is pick those 5 to 7 things, write them down, keep them in the back pocket for the end of the exercise, and then take a look at them again and say, oh my gosh, we missed this really important thing that we have to communicate. We're going to have to go back and readjust what we've done. I mentioned a minute ago about your superpower. Understanding your superpower is really important. And this can be anything. I had a chat with someone after the workshop session a little while ago about what the superpower for his company might be. And it might just be around taking something that is really burdensome and making it joyful, taking the burden out of something. That could be the superpower of your company. Whatever your superpower is, you really need to understand what it is that differentiates you from everyone else. Okay, once you understand all of that I just explained, now you're ready to think about the emotional side of your brand. And brands, like people, have archetypes. And lucky for all of us, we can rely on Carl Jung and his psychology research from many, many years ago, where he came up with 12 personality archetypes for humans. Turns out those archetypes also work for companies as well. So I like to take my clients through an exercise to help them figure out what archetype are they around this circle of archetypes. Are they a hero? Are they an explorer? Are they a sage? Whatever it is that they might be, and we spend time talking about it, and it actually uncovers something about their personality that will inform our positioning. So at the end of all of this, once you understand what your rational side is, through going through all of that, and then you understand the emotional side, we want to build an elevator story. And the elevator story is part of a message architecture, which I'll get to in a second. But this little exercise, everybody's probably familiar with the game Mad Libs. That's a kid's sort of word game. If you can fill in these blanks on your elevator story, you actually will be able to answer those questions. What is your role and what is your relevance in the marketplace? So just very simply, the first sentence you're not going to use for public, but I like to put it in because it's good for you to know it for yourselves. But my company, as a mother or a mechanic or a missionary, is focused on customer segmentation or value or next big thing, whatever it is. And then you basically go on to describe what your company is. What is your category? What is your differentiated solution? And what is the target market you're going after? The second part of this is, what is your value proposition? It's good to use a verb in that. What are the benefits, some of the benefits of the product or service that other competitors do not offer? And then it exists, why? It exists at this time for what reason? If you can fill those blanks in, you've actually got yourself a pretty powerful elevator story that differentiates you in the marketplace. And with that elevator story, you can go to market. And you can create this thing I call a message architecture. And the message architecture becomes the virus that you want to inject into all of your communication materials, whether it's social media, whether it's brochures, whether it's sales pitches, recruiting materials, whatever it is that you have your website, all of this stuff should contain the messages in this message architecture, because they become the virus that infects the market with your story. And I know one of the challenges you have in New Zealand is, how do you get your story beyond here? How do you take it to the world? Well, you take it to the world with a giant digital footprint. What you're trying to do with your story, once you understand your differentiator and why you're better than anyone else, is you want that story to wind up in a giant digital place where people from all over the world can access it. And that's really what we're shooting for. So that process is what I call activating your story. And you can activate your story through 3 channels. And we're lucky today. We have a big channel called Owned that we didn't used to have, because of the internet. We have our own website, our own blogs, our own social media. We have all of this stuff that we can put our own story on in the way that we want to put it, and get it out there and create as big a digital footprint as we can, pretty much for free. That's a wonderful channel to make use of. The second channel is what I call Earned, which is the old channel of public relations, which is the channel of influencing journalists to write stories about you in the way that you want them to write. So you still have to do that. And the third channel is the paid channel, which is advertising, and that's really dependent upon your budget, but it can start very, very inexpensively with AdWords, and it can go all the way up to Super Bowl ads for millions and millions of dollars. And that's budget dependent. What you want to do with these 3 channels is master them with your story and create this giant digital footprint. So the whole point of all of this is to create your differentiation, put it in a story, and get it in the marketplace. And this will help you overcome the geographic barriers that you have here in New Zealand, because everything is digital today. So I like to sort of end this by saying, once you know what you're made of, you're able to make something of it. And that's really what positioning is all about, and what the DNA framework is all about. So with that, I'm going to ask my interviewer to come up, and we're going to do a Q&A. So thank you.
15 minutes. Nice one.
Great.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Don't forget to keep those questions coming in using Slido. Fantastic presentation, great extension of the workshop this morning. So the number one question that people have been asking, what do you think are the biggest challenges ahead for 2018 for the tech sector, both in New Zealand and overseas?
Well, I think that the tech sector biggest challenges today is there's millions of people doing millions of products, and even here, the competition is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it makes it more challenging. And these are wonderful summits in order to bring people together to learn about what people are doing. But one of the things you'll probably walk away with is, oh my gosh, other people are doing what I'm doing. And that's kind of a scary thing.
Now that framework of the 6 C's, someone's mentioned that it seems to be quite divorced from customer financial drivers. Is there a reason for that, or where would they fit in that framework, do you think?
That's a great question. So customer financial drivers, I think, are dependent on the product and the service. There are some services for which people will pay whatever for it, right? And there are some services or products that people are not going to be able to do that. So that's part of the positioning thing. You have to figure out what the target market is you're selling to and what are their financial drivers. And also, that's where the context plays into the role here, because if you're living in a financial downturn, everybody's financial thing goes down.
Yeah.
So you have to reposition your product for that particular context.
Very good. How important is technical research in developing tech businesses? How are businesses supporting research, do you think?
Well, research, I hope, helps you come up with a better product that solves a problem. So one of the issues you have with tech companies, with engineering-oriented companies, is they often develop solutions to problems that don't exist. And that's a problem, because what you really want to do is sell something to people who have a pain point so you can solve it with your problem. Technical research helps to do that, but it has to be married to market research. And that's one of the biggest failures I see in tech companies, is they forget about the market research and they just do the technical research.
How do we compete with Chinese startups and incubators who provide really cost-effective solutions? I'm throwing everything at it. What do we do in that space to compete? Because that's got to be a tough one.
You have to find the value. So one of the things about super low-end products and services is they really tend to just solve one piece of a problem. They don't tend to be a larger solution. And so I think one of the things, and not only in New Zealand, but this is true for America and other countries, is to what other value can you add to that solution that the cheaper provider cannot add? What is the other value? And that's part of the positioning equation, is thinking about what you can add that the cheap provider cannot add.
Fair enough. Now I've got a question for you here. You talk about brands, and you've obviously been experienced with brands, using lots of brands, companies the whole time. What to you is a really good brand or a company that's completely nailed it, both in terms of that rational and that emotional? You've got that positioning, right, and you've got the brand. What's a company that's nailed it?
So I mentioned this to you earlier, but my favorite company on that front is really Netflix. You guys have Netflix here? Yeah? Mm-hmm. So I think Netflix has really nailed the rational side. They've nailed the emotional side, and they've got the whole community kind of talking about Netflix and chill, right? It comes to mean certain things, and it's the nirvana for a brand to have both of those things nailed and have the community talking about it like that.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you're here and you spend a lot of time working with Steve Jobs. Now, someone's asked the question, what are the 3 main things you learned from Steve Jobs?
I learned a lot